return. Tom opened the front door to his home, bone-tired after a grueling week of meetings and flights. He hadn't been home in days, and the darkness inside didn't exactly feel like a welcome. All except for a faint light flickering from the kitchen. The warm yellow glow spilling into the hallway seemed oddly out of place. As Tom dragged his suitcase over the threshold, something about the house felt wrong. Maybe it was just the silence, but his gut was doing somersaults. His fingers brushed over the strap of his briefcase, gripping it tighter as he moved through the hallway. The sound of distant, careless laughter drifted towards him, echoing from the kitchen. "Emma," he called, his voice low, cautious. The laughter paused, then resumed. Tom quickened his steps, rounding the corner. There by the fridge stood Mark, his best friend. He had a bottle of beer in his hand, smirking like he didn't have a care in the world. The light above cast deep shadows across his features, but the wicked glint in his eye was unmistakable. "Hey, buddy," Mark greeted, raising his bottle in a mocking toast. "You're home early." Tom froze, the words not quite registering. His heart raced, that sick, foreboding feeling tightening in his chest. Mark's smirk grew wider. Guess what he said, his voice dripping with malice. He took a slow sip of his beer, then leaned against the counter, eyes never leaving Tom's. "I just slept with your wife." The words hit like a hammer. Tom's hand clenched into a fist, every muscle in his body going rigid. Tom stood frozen in place, the words echoing in his head. "I just slept with your wife." His mind couldn't process it, didn't want to. He had known Mark for years, trusted him, laughed with him, even confided in him during some of his darkest moments. And now the man he called a brother had just blown apart everything he thought he knew. Mark's smirk deepened, as if savoring Tom's shock. He leaned back against the counter, clearly enjoying the torment he'd just unleashed. The sound of the beer bottle clinking lightly against the counter snapped Tom out of his daze, and the rage building inside him surged. His eyes burned into Mark's, but his body refused to move. It was like a war had erupted inside him, the primal urge to lash out, to tear Mark apart limb by limb, fighting against the last vestiges of self-control. Instead of violence, Tom gritted his teeth, forcing his voice to stay calm, to stay steady. "Where's Emma?" he asked, his voice strained but somehow controlled. Every part of him wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he had to know her side before he let his fury take control. Mark chuckled darkly, as if this was all just a game to him. "Upstairs," he said, nodding casually in the direction of the staircase. "Resting after hour." Fun, his words dripped with mockery, and it felt like gasoline being poured on the fire already burning inside Tom. For a moment, Tom said nothing, just stood there, fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white from the pressure. He wanted nothing more than to shut Mark up for good. But something inside held him back. It wasn't just about Mark. It wasn't even just about the betrayal. It was about the one person he'd built his life around for the last decade, Emma. Without another word, Tom turned on his heel and strode down the hall toward the stairs, ignoring Mark's taunting laughter that followed him like a shadow. His heart was pounding so loudly in his ears that it drowned out everything else. Each step felt heavier than the last, like he was trudging toward some kind of execution. As he reached the top of the stairs, Tom could already feel the weight of the conversation looming over him, threatening to crush him. He pushed open the bedroom door softly, the familiar creak of the hinges breaking the silence. The room was dim, illuminated only by the sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains, and there, lying in bed, was Emma. She was curled up under the sheets, facing away from the door, her breathing soft and steady. For a brief second, Tom hesitated, caught between the desire to wake her gently and the anger that had been threatening to explode ever since Mark's confession. He stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the image Mark had just painted. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer to the bed, the floorboards creaking under his weight. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. She stirred, slowly turning over to face him. Her eyes met his, sleepy at first, then widening with realization as she saw the look on his face, the anger, the hurt. She sat up quickly, pulling the sheet closer to her chest, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over her face. Tom clenched his fists again, his jaw tightening as he spoke, barely able to keep his voice from breaking. "Is it true?" Emma swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, a single broken movement. "Yes." It was a whisper, barely audible, but it shattered whatever hope Tom had left. Tom stared at Emma, his entire world crumbling beneath him. That single word yes hung in the air, suffocating him. It was like a knife twisted deep into his gut, leaving him gasping for breath. He had expected a denial, maybe even an excuse, but not this. Not her admission of guilt. He had wanted to believe there was some mistake, some misunderstanding. But now there was no more room for hope. He couldn't look at her anymore. His eyes shifted to the floor, the weight of everything too much to bear. He could hear his pulse thundering in his ears, feel the rage boiling just beneath the surface, but he fought to stay calm. He had to understand why. He needed to know how everything had gone so wrong, how they had gone so wrong. Why his voice cracked as he spoke, barely more than a whisper, but it was filled with every ounce of pain he was feeling. Emma took a shaky breath, her fingers clutching the sheet as if it could shield her from the intensity of his gaze. She seemed to be struggling to find the words, her eyes filled with guilt and something that almost resembled fear. "I didn't," she started, then stopped, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Tom scoffed, his anger flaring at her words. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Emma, he's downstairs, laughing about it like it's some sick joke." His voice rose, his control slipping, but he couldn't hold back anymore. The betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak, it all came spilling out, uncontrollable and raw. Emma winced at his outburst, her tears now flowing freely. "I was lonely, Tom," she finally cried, her voice trembling. "You were gone all the time. Business trips, meetings, late nights. I barely saw you anymore. And when you were here, it was like you weren't really here with me. You were always distracted, always thinking about work." Tom blinked, stunned by her confession. He had always worked hard, always pushed himself to be successful, to provide the best life for Emma, to give them everything they could ever need. He thought he was doing the right thing. But had it really cost him his marriage? "Mark, he was there," Emma continued, her voice breaking. "He listened. He made me feel seen, made me feel seen, made me feel like I mattered." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now. "But I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't mean for it to turn into this." Tom stared at her, his heart torn between fury and despair. He had never felt so betrayed, so blindsided. His own best friend, the man he trusted most in the world, sleeping with his wife under his own roof. "How long?" Tom asked, his voice suddenly cold. He had to know the depth of the betrayal, how far it had gone. Emma hesitated, and that brief pause sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. "A few months," she whispered, her words barely audible through her sobs. Months. For months they had been doing this behind his back. Tom clenched his fists, his knuckles white as he fought the urge to break something, to shout, to let his rage take over completely. The idea that every time he had been out of town, every moment he thought he was doing what was best for them, Emma and Mark had been together laughing, sharing, touching, it was unbearable. "I'm so sorry, Tom," Emma cried, reaching for him, but he recoiled from her touch as if she had burned him. The sight of her, the smell of her, it all reminded him of what she had done, of the life they had shattered. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He couldn't let her touch him, not now, not ever again. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Emma's quiet sobs. Tom's mind raced, struggling to process everything. His best friend had betrayed him. His wife had betrayed him. And now nothing would ever be the same again. Tom stood there staring at Emma, his mind a whirlwind of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. The woman he had built a life with, shared dreams with, had just confessed to destroying everything. And for what? Loneliness? Attention? He felt sick, like he didn't even know her anymore. His chest tightened as the weight of her betrayal pressed down on him, crushing him from the inside out. Emma was still sobbing, her face buried in her hands, but her tears didn't move him anymore. Her apologies, her guilt, they all felt hollow now. What good were apologies after months of lies? After Mark? Mark. Tom's thoughts shifted to the man downstairs, lounging in his kitchen, drinking his beer, laughing at his misery. The fury that had been simmering inside him now began to boil. He could almost hear Mark's mocking voice, see his smug grin, and it was like gasoline thrown on the fire. Without thinking, Tom turned on his heel and stormed out of the bedroom, ignoring Emma's cries for him to wait, to talk. He couldn't hear her anymore over the blood pounding in his ears. His vision tunneled as he descended the stairs. One thought consuming him: Mark needs to pay. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his steps heavy and deliberate. The soft glow of the kitchen light illuminated Mark, who was now leaning casually against the counter, taking another long drink from the bottle. He hadn't even bothered to leave, hadn't tried to slip away while Tom was upstairs confronting Emma. That cocky, carefree smirk was still plastered across his face, as if none of this meant anything to him. "Still here, I see," Tom said, his voice low and dangerous, barely controlled. Mark raised an eyebrow, his grin widening as if he were entertained by Tom's anger. "Why wouldn't I be? Figured you'd want to hear more about your wife's new hobbies," he laughed, that infuriating, careless laugh that sent Tom's blood boiling all over again. Tom's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body shaking with the effort of holding himself back. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to tear into Mark, to wipe that smug look off his face for good. But something stopped him. A part of him knew that once he crossed that line, there was no going back. "You're really that proud of yourself, aren't you?" Tom asked, his voice strained. "Sleeping with your best friend's wife. Was this some sick competition for you? A way to get back at me?" Mark shrugged, taking another swig from the bottle. "You were always the golden boy, Tom. The one with the perfect life. The successful career, the pretty wife. And well, I was just the best friend, wasn't I?" He chuckled, his words laced with bitterness. "It was only a matter of time before I showed you what you were missing." Tom's heart pounded against his ribs, the weight of Mark's words hitting him like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just about Emma. It was about jealousy, about Mark's deep-seated resentment that had been festering for years. All those times they'd shared beers, laughed over old memories, Mark had been hiding this darkness beneath it all. "You think this makes you better than me?" Tom spat, his fury barely contained. "You think taking something from me makes you a winner?" Mark's smirk faded slightly, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. "I think it makes us even," he said coldly. "You've had it all for too long. Maybe now you'll know what it feels like to lose something." Tom's breath came in ragged, shallow bursts, his hands trembling with rage. The room seemed to close in on him, the air thick with tension. He took a step toward Mark, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. But just as his body prepared to explode into violence, Emma's voice echoed down the stairs, desperate and broken. "Tom, please." The sound of her voice cut through the haze of fury, pulling him back from the edge. He stopped, his fist lowering, his gaze still locked on Mark, who was watching him with a smug, almost expectant look. Tom shook his head, his chest heaving as he fought to control himself. "You're not worth it," he muttered, his voice raw with pain. "Neither of you are." With that, Tom turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in the kitchen. He could still hear Emma's sobs from upstairs, but he didn't look back. He couldn't. All he knew was that he had to get out of this house, out of this nightmare, before he lost himself completely. Tom walked out of the house, the cool night air hitting him like a slap to the face. He paused for a moment on the front steps, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. His mind was racing, a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief swirling around, but beneath it all there was a profound emptiness. His marriage was in shambles, his best friend had stabbed him in the back, and nothing in his life seemed real anymore. He looked around the neighborhood, the streetlights casting a pale glow on the quiet suburban houses. Everything seemed so normal, so still. How was it possible that his world had just fallen apart, yet the world around him continued to turn? He wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but instead he clenched his fists and started walking. His footsteps echoed on the pavement as he headed toward the park a few blocks away. It was the place he always went when he needed to think, to clear his head. It had been a sanctuary for him in the past, a place to escape the pressures of work or the occasional argument with Emma. But tonight it felt different, like no place could give him peace anymore. The park was deserted when he arrived. The playground stood empty, swings creaking slightly in the breeze. He sat down on one of the benches, running his hands through his hair, his mind replaying everything that had just happened. Mark's smug grin, Emma's tear-streaked face, the sickening words of their betrayal, it all played on a loop in his head. How long had it been going on? He couldn't stop thinking about it. Every business trip, every time he left Emma alone, had she been with Mark. The thought made his stomach churn. He had always trusted her. Sure, their marriage had its ups and downs, but he never doubted her loyalty. He thought their love was solid. unshakable. How had he been so blind? He remembered the early days of their marriage, how they would stay up late, talking for hours about their dreams, their future. Back then, everything felt possible. They had been a team, inseparable. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. The long hours at work, the constant travel, it had taken a toll on their relationship. He knew that now, but never in his wildest dreams had he thought it would lead to this. As the minutes dragged on, Tom found himself spiraling into darker thoughts. He had spent years building a life for Emma, trying to be the perfect husband, the successful businessman. And yet, in the end, it wasn't enough. It was never enough, he thought bitterly. She had still turned to someone else, and not just anyone, Mark, the man who had been by his side through thick and thin. His phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, half expecting it to be Emma, begging for forgiveness, or maybe Mark taunting him again. But when he looked at the screen, it was a message from his sister, Sarah. "Hey, how's it going? Haven't heard from you in a while. Call me when you can. Love you." Tom stared at the message for a moment, his fingers hovering over the screen. Sarah had always been there for him, always ready to listen when things got tough. But he didn't know how to tell her this. How could he explain the mess his life had become? He couldn't even wrap his own mind around it. He put the phone away without replying, leaning back on the bench and staring up at the stars. They seemed so distant, so cold, just like everything else in his life right now. He wanted to feel something other than this gnawing emptiness, but the more he thought about it, the more hopeless it all seemed. How was he supposed to move forward from this? How do you rebuild your life when everything you thought you knew was a lie? The sound of footsteps on the gravel path broke the silence. Tom turned his head, expecting to see a jogger or someone walking their dog. Instead, it was Mark. Tom's heart pounded as he saw Mark approaching in the dim light of the park. His mind raced, anger flaring up again, threatening to overwhelm him. What the hell is he doing here? Tom's fists instinctively clenched at his sides. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to finally unleash the fury he had been holding back since he first heard Mark's taunting confession. But something in the way Mark walked calm, even casual, made Tom freeze in place, rooted to the bench. Mark stopped a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, his expression unreadable. The smirk from earlier was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there as if waiting for Tom to make the first move. The silence between them was suffocating. Tom broke it, his voice low and dangerous. "Why are you here, Mark?" Mark shrugged, taking a step closer. "Figured we should talk." Talk? Tom's voice trembled with barely controlled rage. "What is there to talk about? You slept with my wife, and now you're here to what? Gloat? Rub it in my face some more." Mark shook his head, his expression still eerily calm. No, not to gloat, to explain. Tom stood up from the bench, taking a step toward Mark, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles ached. "Explain. You think anything you say will make this better?" "I'm not here to make it better," Mark replied coolly. "I'm here because you deserve to know the truth. You need to understand why it happened." "Why it happened," Tom repeated, his voice rising with anger. "It happened because you're a backstabbing piece of shit. That's why." Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "Think what you want. But this isn't just about me. It's about you, too." Tom blinked, momentarily stunned by the audacity of Mark's words. "Me? You're blaming me for this." "I'm not blaming you," Mark said, his voice measured, calm in a way that made Tom want to hit him even more. "But you have to see it, Tom. You've been so wrapped up in your work and your business trips that you stopped seeing Emma. You stopped being there for her." Tom's breath hitched. He had heard something similar from Emma upstairs, but hearing it from Mark, the man who had betrayed him, felt like a slap in the face. "You don't get to lecture me about my marriage," Tom spat. "You don't get to tell me what I did wrong when you were the one sneaking around behind my back." Mark sighed, his expression almost pitying. "I'm not excusing what I did. It was wrong. But Emma, she was falling apart, Tom. She was lonely and you weren't there. And, yeah, I took advantage of that, but at least I saw her." Tom's hands were shaking now, his anger threatening to spill over. "You saw her? You saw her? You think that gives you the right to sleep with my wife? To destroy my marriage?" "No," Mark said, his voice dropping. "I don't. But the truth is, your marriage was already falling apart. You just didn't want to see it." The words hit Tom like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue, to deny it, but the truth was gnawing at him. Deep down, he knew that Mark wasn't completely wrong. Things had been strained between him and Emma for a long time, but he had been too busy, too focused on his career to pay attention. He had convinced himself that everything was fine, that their love would survive whatever challenges life threw at them. But it hadn't. Tom let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. So what? You were doing me a favor? Saving Emma from her loneliness. Mark looked down at the ground, his voice quiet now. No, I was selfish. I wanted her, and I took what wasn't mine. But you needed to hear the truth. You needed to know that this didn't just happen in a vacuum. It wasn't random. It was because your marriage was already broken. Tom stood there, stunned, his body trembling with anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sadness. He wanted to hate Mark, to unleash the violence he had been holding back, but now all he felt was hollow. Mark looked up at him, his eyes searching Tom's face. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Tom. I just thought you should know. Tom stared at him for a long moment, then finally turned away, unable to look at the man who had destroyed everything. Get out of my sight, Mark, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Mark didn't argue. He turned and walked away, leaving Tom alone in the darkness, the weight of his shattered life pressing down on him. Tom sat in the park long after Mark had left, his thoughts swirling in an endless loop. The anger had faded now, leaving only a deep, gnawing ache in its place. Mark's words echoed in his mind. Your marriage was already broken. It hurt because deep down Tom knew it was true. Things hadn't been right between him and Emma for a long time, but he had been too busy, too distracted to deal with it. The realization cut him to the core. For years he had thrown himself into his work, justifying the long hours and the constant business trips as being for their future. He had convinced himself that the sacrifices he made were worth it, that the time spent away from home was a small price to pay for the financial security and success he had built for them. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of the most important thing, his relationship with Emma. He couldn't remember the last time they had truly connected, the last time they had talked about something that mattered, something beyond the mundane details of their daily lives. The distance between them had grown slowly, like a crack in the foundation, widening little by little until it was too big to ignore. Tom pressed his palms to his face, feeling the exhaustion in his bones. He had been so blind, he had let the busyness of life take over, assuming that their love would withstand anything, that Emma would always be there. But now everything was shattered. His marriage, his trust, his sense of security, it was all gone, obliterated by a single betrayal. But was it really just Mark's betrayal that had destroyed everything? Or had he played a part in this too? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he had neglected Emma, how many times he had chosen work over her, how many moments he had missed while he was chasing success. The truth was, they had both failed each other. The sound of footsteps behind him made Tom tense for a moment, but when he turned, it wasn't Mark. It was Emma. She looked small and vulnerable in the pale moonlight, her face streaked with dried tears. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were dull and hollow. She stood a few feet away from him, as if afraid to get too close. Tom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Can we talk? Tom didn't respond at first. He just looked at her, his heart heavy with a mixture of love, hurt, and anger. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, wasn't sure if there was anything left to say at all. But seeing her standing there so broken stirred something in him. I didn't know you were here, Emma said, her voice trembling. I thought you left. I didn't, Tom replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Emma took a hesitant step closer, wringing her hands nervously. I don't know how to fix this, Tom. I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted this to happen. Tom shook his head, the bitterness rising in his throat. But it did happen, Emma. It's already done. I know, she said quickly, her eyes pleading. I know I messed up. I made a terrible mistake. But it wasn't just about him. She struggled to say Mark's name. It was about us. We stopped talking, stopped being there for each other. Tom's gaze dropped to the ground. He didn't need to hear this from her. He already knew it. But hearing it out loud from her lips made the pain sharper, more real. I should have told you how I was feeling, Emma continued, tears streaming down her face. I should have told you I felt so alone instead of turning to someone else. But you were always gone, and when you were here, it felt like I didn't even matter anymore." "You mattered," Tom said, his voice rough. "You always mattered, Emma." "Then why didn't you show it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you fight for us before it was too late?" Tom didn't have an answer. He had no excuse for the distance he had let grow between them. He had taken her for granted, and now they were both paying the price for it. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I don't know." Emma wiped at her tears, her body shaking with quiet sobs. "I want to fix this, Tom. I want us to be okay again." Tom looked at her, feeling the weight of her words, but he wasn't sure it was that simple. The damage had been done. They were standing in the wreckage of their marriage, and he wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saving. Tom stared at Emma, her words hanging in the air between them. She wanted to fix this, to salvage what was left of their marriage, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that too much had been broken. He didn't know if he had it in him to forgive, or if he even wanted to. The park felt eerily quiet around them, the distant hum of the city fading into nothingness as they stood there, two people who had once built a life together, now surrounded by the ruins of it. Emma wiped her tears with trembling hands, her eyes pleading with him to say something, anything that might give her hope. "I don't know if we can fix this," Tom finally said, his voice low and heavy. "I don't know if I can fix this." Emma took a shaky breath, stepping closer to him, her hands reaching out as if she wanted to touch him, but unsure if she still had the right. "Tom, I know I've hurt you. I know I made a terrible mistake and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But we've been through so much together. Doesn't that count for something?" Tom clenched his jaw, trying to keep his emotions in check. "It does. But this isn't something we can just walk away from like it never happened, Emma. You slept with Mark. Mark, my best friend." The bitterness in his voice made Emma flinch, and she dropped her gaze, unable to look him in the eye. I know what I did, and I can't take it back, but I'm asking for a chance. A chance to make things right, to show you that I still love you." Tom closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him. He believed her. He knew she loved him, but love wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. It wasn't enough to wipe away the image of Mark's smug face, or the memory of Emma admitting that it had been going on for months. Months, that was the part that stung the most. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, it had been deliberate, repeated, and hidden from him for so long. He had been living in blissful ignorance while the people closest to him had been lying to his face. "You love me?" Tom asked, his voice hard. "How could you love me and do what you did? How could you betray me like that and then say you want to make it right?" Emma sobbed, her tears falling faster now. "Because I'm a fool, Tom. I was selfish and lonely and lost, and I let that lead me to the worst decision of my life. But I do love you. I've always loved you." Tom looked away, his chest tight. Part of him wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that they could somehow rebuild from this. But another part, the part that had been shattered by the betrayal, knew that things could never go back to the way they were. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," Tom said softly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "How do we come back from this, Emma? How do I look at you and not see everything you did behind my back? How do I pretend that none of it happened?" Emma choked on a sob, her hands reaching out to him, desperate. "We can take it one step at a time. We can go to therapy, we can talk, we can work on it. Please, Tom, don't just give up on us." Tom shook his head slowly, his heart breaking all over again. "I'm not giving up, Emma. I just don't know if I have it in me to keep fighting for something that's already gone." Silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. Emma's sobs grew quieter, and she wiped at her eyes, trying to hold herself together. "So, what now?" she whispered. Tom exhaled, feeling the full weight of what he was about to say. "I need time. Time to think, time to figure out if I can live with this. With us." Emma nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears welled up. "I'll give you all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out completely." Tom didn't respond right away. He looked up at the sky, the stars flickering above them, indifferent to the pain playing out below. Then he turned back to Emma, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while. I need space." Emma nodded again, though the despair in her eyes was unmistakable. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without another word, Tom turned and walked away, the sound of Emma's quiet sobs lingering behind him like an echo of their broken past. He didn't know where he was going or what the future held, but for now he just needed to get away from everything, the lies, the betrayal, the hurt and figure out if there was anything left worth saving.